hello, and welcome to KCIW's Curry Café. Hey, and happy Easter Sunday and 420, by the way. I'm Rick McNamer, producer and volunteer. Every Sunday, host Ray Gary puts together a program of guests who discuss various topics of interest to our community. As listeners, you can text in questions or comments about our discussion at 541-661-4098. Again, that's 541-661-4098 to text in. Now, before I turn it over to Ray, I just want to welcome a couple of new listeners that I hope are out there. I'm pretty sure they are. That's my friends, Julie and Steve. Okay, so here's Ray to tell us about today's show.
Well, welcome again to the Curry Café. And every week I take this microphone and I say, well, we're going to introduce you to experts that we've searched the entire community to find. And I'll probably go to hell for telling that lie every week, but this week we actually do have people who know what they're talking about. So if we could start from my left, we will have everybody introduce themselves and promote any gigs you got coming up or whatever.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Happy Easter, as you said, and happy Sunday. And it's a beautiful day, even though there's gale force winds out there. So hold on to your hats. My name is Tabatha Rood. I previously did a show probably about a month ago. I'm heavily involved in forest collaborative management and held a workshop on potential operational delineation lines, which are wildfire potential control lines, on March 31st that was well attended. So I'm really passionate about bringing wildfire risk reduction funding to the county, and I'm kind of an expert in National Environmental Policy Act analysis.
Thanks, Tabatha. Jala Dela Shushi Katrina Thompson. I'm from Northwest American Indian Coalition and honored to be here today. And for our shameless plug, I guess, we would share that we have a regional calendar of events on our website. If you go to nwaic.org/calendar-events, we're keeping a pretty robust calendar of events there that includes not only historical dates, but also upcoming events, tribal events, as well as deadlines for comment periods and even grant opportunities. So just want to share that with the community.
And you don't have a little girl with you today?
Not today, I don't.
That's very disappointing. I would like you to bring her from now on.
Will do.
She was the star of our show.
Well, she was absolute charmer when she was here last time. How old is she?
11.
11,
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm Dakotah, and I live here in Brookings, and I am a cartographer. So I make maps, and I feel really fortunate to be able to support Katrina and Tabatha and all of the cool work they do around wildfire risk reduction and cultural stewardship. So a little plug, I also have a show here at KCIW. It's Tuesdays at 3, and it is called The Daily Weekly, and we listen to music, hot tracks, hot takes. And I also have another project. It is a database of maps that are tracking things that are going on related to federal policy and social and environmental impacts. So we are tracking things like people who have been let go due to the Doge cuts, students who have had their visas wrongfully pulled, science and health implications of all of the funding stuff that's going on right now. So you can check that out at www.radgeo.com, radgeo like rad geography, RADGEO. And yeah, happy to be on the show. Thank you.
And I will heartily recommend Dakotah's show. If you ever watch the television show or listen to a radio show where you're yelling, yeah, right on, that's it. That's his show.
Right on. Thank you.
So who wants to start out today?
Well, before we do, I guess the main topic I believe we had talked about is going to focus on green energy.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of developments happening, particularly in Curry County with offshore wind. But we really wanted to talk about renewable energy options and all of the types of green energy or new renewable energy that's being proposed, from mineral mining across the globe to offshore wind proposals locally, and just especially the impacts to Indigenous communities, I think, is a big focus of our.
Yeah. Our text number again is 541-661-4098. I wanted to get that out there. Sorry.
And stay close to your phones because I think you're probably going to want to participate in today's show.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we wanted to, I think a lot of, offshore wind is a hot topic down here, especially now. There's been a lot of energy and emphasis on re-educating Curry County on the benefits of transitioning away from fossil fuels. And I think a lot of people won't deny that we need better options, but at what cost? And from an environmental analysis and public input perspective, the process has been very forced for a lot of populations, mostly Indigenous and fishing communities. But we really want to look at the trade-offs there and who's going to be really impacted and what the analysis shows and whether we have enough evidence to know what the impacts will really be.
I'm sorry, Katrina. I was going to say all three of you guys are always participating, I believe, and Tabatha, I know you've talked about it, trying to get the two sides together. There's going to be differences of opinion and, to try to work together and get a workable solution for everybody.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really the only path forward, I think, is having the difficult conversations and coming together to work through some of the issues. And we can't do it alone. We have to do it together, no matter how difficult those conversations might be.
And have you had any luck doing that?
Well, I think so. I think this radio show presents an opportunity to have some of that dialogue, whether it's people calling into us or having these follow-up conversations in people's homes, and our ability to share these perspectives, I think, is starting those conversations that need to happen in not such a forced way.
Yeah, everything takes time to work through, and a lot of careful consideration and just thinking through the options, as well as the benefits, as well as the repercussions and the unintended consequences all have to be considered and weighed. I did want to share that just recently the GAO, Government Accounting Office, released a report on this topic of offshore wind, 25-106-998. And they did highlight that there was some significant gaps in federal oversight with the offshore wind development, particularly concerning the inconsistencies in the engagement with the tribes and the fishing communities. And so there are valid concerns and definitely need to, this is a first step forward in addressing those concerns and bringing the people together to try to come up with some unified solutions that may include offshore wind. It may not. There may be other options. So we need to have those conversations and work through that.
I did write down the ones that I knew about of renewable sources were, we just talked about the wind, the solar, geothermal, hydropower, ocean energy, and bioenergy. Mm-hmm. Those are all the ones that I came up with. Do any of those, for any of you, seem to be the best to work for, or all of them in a combination? Or do you have an opinion on it?
I would just give an anecdote of my first kind of brush with what would be renewable energy was cobalt mining for all of our cell phones and all the tech. My undergraduate studied bonobos and their cognitive development related to humans, and I was a really young, fresh college student, really excited to go into the field, which they are native to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. There's been a civil war happening basically over the cobalt mines there since the 70s, so pretty catastrophic in terms of human population impacts, but it is slave-like conditions for producing the materials that are necessary for all of our smartphones to be working and all of the microchips to be produced. And it really hit home for me that these bonobos are learning to use machine guns because they're around them and they're smart enough to know how to defend themselves from this. And for me, that was really looking at, yes, it is a beneficial option, but it is happening in a place with such little environmental regulation or even human rights advocacy that there are huge impacts in other places. And I think that's kind of what's happening in Curry County with some of these proposals is there's so few people here. We've got way more trees than people. Then you can kind of easily push over a place like this and say, well, it's not happening right on my ocean view, so we'll put it down in a place with way fewer people. And to your question of, yes, I think diversifying your energy sources is a really great way to minimize the impacts of any one over another. But there's huge potential for bioenergy. And from a wildfire risk reduction standpoint, we're looking at a massive amount of fuels that are out in the forest. And trees are a renewable resource. We have the ability to understand our impacts in a way that we don't know what's going on 30 miles offshore, in the same way that we can study the forest in our backyard.
I believe you've done quite a bit of research on biochar, Dakotah.
Yeah, I think the biomass one is a really, really interesting one, not just from the perspective of energy production, but for some of the other implications ecologically, like Tabatha was talking about, and some of the other implications economically. But I wanted to say first at a higher level that it's worth considering that with all of the avenues for energy production that we have, whether we would categorize them as clean or dirty, if we look at all of the energy that's currently available to us with the technology we have, we are going to continue to run into issues if our need for energy continues to grow as it is. And I think that oftentimes this conversation around green energy happens within this vacuum, that there's an assumption that the demand for energy is going to change in the way that we all have kind of just assumed that it's going to change. And right now what's happening is that the need for data centers in the United States and the energy that essentially AI, as well as our entire Internet of Things, it is outpacing and is scheduled to outpace our needs as humans. And if right now we went ahead and said, okay, green light with this offshore wind development and other energy production options that we have, we still in Oregon and in the West generally are not going to be able to move away from what we call dirty energy, even if we have all of this clean energy developed, which, as I imagine we'll get into, like, there's problems with the idea of just putting all these windmills out here, mostly that we don't have enough infrastructure to get that power anywhere. We don't actually have what is in need to place to deal with all of this energy coming in. But even if we did, and we had all of these windmills, we would not be able to get away from fossil fuels, because what we're doing is instead we're supplementing our exponential increase for power through data centers. And to me, it's important to look at the entire picture and not just make these assumptions that we are all agreeing unanimously and all voting for our future as a species, just using infinitely more power all the time, and really asking the questions of, like, is this improving our quality of life? Why are we doing this? Are we doing it just because we assume there is no other alternative? Because I think that's the ultimate trap that we can fall in collectively, and as individuals, is to think that there is nothing outside of just this train that's going in this one direction.
And now, if you can figure out a way to put all that on a bumper sticker, we'd be on our really. I've enjoyed me on the daily. We sit down and listen to everything you just said. Oh, you and me, we just dig, baby, dig. You know.
Well, what happened to the, lights off campaign? Reducing our consumption in the 90s was a really big effort to just get people to turn lights off as they left rooms. And I feel like that whole concept of reducing our consumption has been left by the wayside because we found all these technological solutions to our life problems, which, to your point of the hidden meaning behind why we need so many new energy sources is really to power these data centers. And I feel like we're not voting about new wind. We're voting about whether, and we don't get a vote in it, but we're voting on whether to replace arable agricultural land with data centers.
Yeah.
And it's not that long ago that we changed from incandescent bulbs to LEDs, and all these people thought you were chopping their head off or something. Oh, I don't like the way I look in LED light. Well, and those type of excuses. A lot of members of Congress were saying that we were limiting their freedom of choice and just all kinds of nonsense stuff that they don't seem to be able to take the good with the bad. And that's kind of what I'm talking about, the bumper sticker thing.
Totally. And forgive me for going on a rant. I do want to go back to what you were saying, Katrina, about the biomass. And that was one of the energies that was listed as a potential clean energy in the beginning. And it's one that I think is really interesting. And it particularly, like, I think this group of the three of us have interesting things to say about it. So I want to loop it back to that. And like Tabatha was saying, we are essentially given this opportunity with this method of energy production to reduce wildfire risk. And this question of biomass in the forest is a really, really interesting one. So just for our listeners, like if you're in the West, you're familiar that we are in a wildfire crisis, and may also be familiar with the idea that the species in this area, and particularly where we are now, like the coastal mountains, they used to be up to 50% prairies and oak and grasslands. Now the coastal prairies and savannas are down to less than 1% of the terrain, and it's pretty much been dominated by an encroachment of Doug fir, which for a long time has been a really economic and fast-growing tree. It's also quite thirsty, and it's also quite good at catching on fire and spreading fire, especially in the way that we have been cultivating it for the last 100+ years out here as we've been doing really, really severe wildfire suppression. So what we're experiencing now is, we were actually just talking about this at lunch, is the fir mortality. What is the
Firmageddon is the term, but
has anybody else heard this?
No, but I like it.
I like just talk about it a little bit.
Firmageddon is it's Doug fir mortality. It is basically drought followed by a flathead fir boring beetle that attacks fir trees, Douglas fir in particular. It's heavily affecting Jackson, Josephine, and Douglas County in Oregon, and even in Northern California. And it presents a real challenge because you're looking at otherwise merchantable logs that serve absolutely a purpose for, dead and down wood, serves an absolute wildlife function in terms of their utilization. But from a fuel standpoint, we have just increased the flammability of our communities. And due to some of the litigation that I talked about in the last show, there's a lot of resistance to salvage logging. And so therefore, we have kind of just a tinderbox out there of dying trees that are dying faster than we can treat the landscape, and putting our communities at even higher risk to wildfire.
And there's this interesting technology that some people are using. I'm hoping that as it gets better, it might become a more scalable solution. But essentially, if you imagine a shipping container and you imagine that you took the top off of it, well, first off, you put it on a truck, you drove it up into the woods, you set it down at a site, you took the top off of it, you piled it full of logs, and you lit them all on fire. Then that's going to burn super hot, and it's going to make these coals. And when things burn hotter, they burn cleaner, which means more of that mass of that tree is converted to heat, and less is converted to smoke. More smoke occurs when things aren't burning as hot. It's not considered burning as cleanly. So you insulate these big boxes, you burn them super hot, and then there's this technology called an ORC generator, which is a organic Rankine cycle electricity generator. And what it does, if you think like essentially the same technology of a coal-powered train car, where you're taking heat and you're using it to spin something, and you're using that spinning motion in the same way that you would use like a wind turbine to generate electricity. So you're not producing almost any smoke because they're burning so hot. And if you consider the alternatives, that tree would probably burn during a wildfire. During a wildfire, it's not going to burn cleanly, and it's going to produce a ton of carbon emissions and particle emissions. And instead, you're removing some of these fuels. So you're doing this fuels reduction work that we're talking about with reducing wildfire risk, and you're actually generating electricity in the process. I think this is super interesting, and this is something we nerd out about a lot. You're going to go broke doing it right now is my personal belief. And that's what's kept me from calling everybody in my family and asking if they can pool money so I could get a loan and buy one of these things. Because to me, it's like checking a lot of boxes. But that's a technology that's in development right now, and I think it's really interesting.
So would all the brush and everything go in there as well, not just the logs?
Yeah, you can burn high volumes of woody material.
I will say that, to Dakotah's point, it is not economically viable right now. Even if you're burning 6 tons a day, it is not paying itself in terms of the cost of labor to feed the machine. And so this is where small-scale solutions like a community power plant, that is a biomass plant, for instance, you'd need replicable, but it would subsidize power costs from other energy sources. And back to diversifying your energy source, what a beautiful way to deal with your fuels reduction work, create jobs out in the woods, and have some residual power from that mill even that would be processing some of the merchantable wood. So it would be a really great way to diversify. And I just want to mention quickly on the economic frame, you mentioned hydropower. The Pacific Northwest is 90, if not more, it's a little less than 95% hydropowered right now due to Bonneville Power Administration and the series of dams. Dams present all kinds of problems to Indigenous people and fisheries, but there have been a lot of investments to improve that system. It is already in place, and those impacts are known at this point. They're being mitigated is the best way to say that. And wind energy, particularly on-land wind energy, has been plugged into that system and subsidized. And so the subsidies become really important because as a state and as a region, we can subsidize certain energy sources that are otherwise economically not viable to diversify our network of energy sources. But all with the mind for reducing consumption overall is a huge point. Otherwise, we will continue to need every energy source into the future.
Well, I think listeners are understanding why we like to have you three people here.
I'm just trying to picture the bumper sticker.
Well,
It's going to be huge.
no, we're going to need like a flashing thing. We did get a text, and I want to, again, our text line is 541 661-4098. The texter, we're going to go back to Tabatha, your point. The texter says, wait a minute. Did she say the chimps in the Congo are arming themselves with automatic weapons?
It did sound
So
like that.
I will just clarify. Chimpanzees and bonobos are different. We are all one of the 7 great apes. Humans branched off the same branch as chimps and bonobos, but chimpanzees are 98.6% related to humans genetically, and bonobos are 98.7% related. And it's very fascinating because bonobos' societal culture is a matriarchy run by females, female-dominated. They are less warlike and way less territorial. So for a bonobo to pick up a machine gun is even more novel than a chimpanzee picking up a machine gun, because a lot of the early observations of chimpanzee behavior have led to the very patriarchal assumptions that we have about human beings. So, interesting side note, but different than chimps.
While we're on that side note, if you're working in an area with, is it a revolution that's going on, or people with guns? And can you go in there as scientists and work around those people, or will
So
they
that
cut
was
your
the
head off?
issue. The Lolo National Forest in the Democratic Republic of the Congo has the only population of bonobos in the wild in the world. So instead of going to the Congo to study them in their natural habitat, I went to the Columbus Zoo in Ohio. That is the largest
man.
population in the world. Very different setting to be studying them. But the Civil War has been funded by multiple Western countries, including the United States, on both sides. So it is essentially a civil war created by the people consuming the most cobalt, which are mostly Western countries.
So let's talk about subsidies. If we could find some subsidies to do some biomass removal, maybe we could redirect some of that money.
Well, and isn't one of the bigger problems that the developed Western world, we'll call it, always using the other countries for supplies, labor, and they're the ones that suffer while we get maybe just the benefits. But that is a big problem. We don't care. We talked about it in another subject one time about people, the polar bears. Nobody really sees the polar bears hardly, but they're suffering. But we don't care. I care. I care about other countries.
It's out of sight, out of mind, though, right, Rick?
Well, exactly. And that's part of what we're trying to get to, I believe. And Dakotah, you were so right about, I was reading an article, some of Valero, I got to think, Phillips 66, Chevron, they're all shutting down plants right now, refineries in California. And the thing is, yes, fossil fuels are bad. I think they're just bad, but we can't just stop. We need to kind of start weaning our way maybe off of that kind of stuff rather than, well, the fossil fuel executives are complaining that it's the California's strict regulations and they're not going to make enough money. I don't know if I quite believe they're not going to make enough money, but there are a lot of regulations, but we really have to have some regulations. But again, it's back to getting people together. Why couldn't we get with these executives and say, well, before you shut that whole refinery down and screw up the economy of Benicia is one city, and
Can we transition, right?
thank you.
Yeah, finding a transition to green
I think
energy
we've heard
rather
that
than
before from you guys.
It's
Well,
funny to hear the oil companies say they're not going to make enough money when those corporations have made more money than any corporation in the history of the world.
It's worth noting that today is the anniversary of Deep Horizon, 16 years ago. That also happened in the Gulf of Mexico. I'm sorry, the Gulf of America now.
Not here. It's not the Gulf of America.
Okay, great.
My show
Thank
is the
you.
Gulf
Back
of Mexico.
in the Gulf of Mexico,
Right
that is a really devastating story. And I think, to your point, Rick, where it's out of sight, out of mind, the green revolution is really happening on the backs of other people that do not have the voice to speak up for themselves or the power to fight these companies, these large companies, from coming in and really destroying their sacred land and their resources. So I just want to really nod to that in terms of the tribal perspective of offshore wind proposals and some other more local lithium mining be another one that we have some really good examples to share of just people being run over by big industry in the green revolution, because a lot of these oil companies have changed their stripes to fund a lot of this because there's money in it. Katrina, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, so I guess the term for that is the greenwashing, or where do you draw the line between green energy coming from a good way versus ill intent, and that is a valid concern that needs to be discussed as well. I think the industry, when you focus on the economic benefit and the monetary gain from development and other projects, you overlook a lot of things that shouldn't be overlooked. And also just commenting on the hesitancy coming from rural communities, local communities, tribal communities. We've seen a lot of that hesitancy with new development and new programs in COVID. And I think the tribal communities were one of the biggest hesitancy factors in getting those vaccines. And I just wanted to, call out that there's a reason for that hesitancy. There's been generations and after generations of forced experimentation, forced extraction of natural resources, and so on. And so the hesitancy and the wanting to slow down and pace things out and do more study and do more research is really rooted in experience. It's well earned.
And broken promises in a lot of ways.
Offshore wind is a pretty new thing to me. Just within the last year. And I'm also new to the Oregon coast. I grew up in the Rocky Mountains, but I was initially surprised when I came to the table for offshore wind when we were up in Portland at that stakeholder conference. I was surprised how much Indigenous resistance to offshore wind was at first, because in my head I thought renewable energy, clean. The native folk are going to be into getting away from coal. I mean, and oil. That was my level one understanding of it. And that really shifted quickly. And this, what we're speaking to, of broken promises and mistrust. And a moment that really stuck out for me when I was in a table with a bunch of folks who were talking about this was somebody from the Bureau of Oceans and Energy Management was saying, or is that the acronym? It's
BOEM.
BOEM.
Mm-hmm.
They said essentially, trust us on this process. We're going to do a good job with this. And the response was, they were saying this is going to solve all of our energy problems. There's not going to be an energy concern anymore. This is the project. Once we're done with, we got to go tear some things up right now, but we'll have what we need. We'll be good after this. And the response was, well, that's what you told us when you built the dams.
Yeah.
And I've grown up in my life watching every year the progressive extinction of the salmon on the Salmon River, which is the largest intact salmon habitat in the lower 48. And the salmon can't get back because to be born in Stanley, Idaho, make it to the Pacific Ocean and come back requires crossing 16 dams. And it's not rocket science to figure out that that's going to extinct the fish. And we're also not getting our money's worth of electricity from that project. And
Particularly the lower four Snake River dams.
Yeah, it's just been humbling. I'm glad to hear that point.
Kind of surprised that the Indigenous people wouldn't believe what was said to them. They evidently didn't say that this will go on as long as the grass grows and the river run and all that.
Yeah, there's not a lot of evidence to support that.
Well, and in the Columbia River Basin, so back when the Endangered Species Act was initiated, the Bonneville Power Administration currently pays $300 million a year in a fish and wildlife habitat mitigation program for the inundation and operation of those dams. And so there has been a lot of mitigation done directly to tribal communities impacted by that. There's been a lot of work done for habitat restoration within the Columbia Basin. There's been a lot of work on upland wildlife habitat. And Bonneville supports a huge amount of tribal fish and wildlife programs, as well as Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. However, here on this southwest coast of Oregon, we don't have that luxury. We don't have a promised mitigation plan for offshore wind. And to your point of it being itself a green renewable energy, the process of installing and operating that machinery is not a clean process. 30 miles offshore is a lot of gas in a boat. Driving those wind turbines one by one down here is not a clean process until we've transitioned away from that. And, even if they arrived on Tesla trucks, the lithium in that battery for that Tesla truck is mined on the sacred land of the Fort McDermott people in Nevada and southeastern Oregon. And so there is no perfect solution, and the sale of these solutions as the perfect solution and such a trust us, this is a silver bullet, should make anyone question the legitimacy of that claim, let alone Native people that have been burned over and over again by the government.
Boy, no kidding. Isn't it about time that we start to open our ears to the Indigenous people that we just slammed shut for forever, almost?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it shows, the lands that were given to these tribes when they were forced to go onto reservations in the first place were given to them in a lot of ways because they were undesirable lands. And now that they've found these mineral deposits, all of the sudden, they're ours again.
Was it that the Black Hills of Dakota was similar to stuff like that?
Oh, yeah.
And then, there's gold there? Yeah. Okay, we want it back again. I mean, we got to understand that history.
Absolutely.
History that's trying to be unwritten right now.
Yeah.
In certain ways. We do have another text I'd like to read. Thank you, texter. It says, we need to give Mother Nature a break to reset her water cycle. Yet we build huge cities in coastal deserts as corporation buy headwaters from rivers to make it worse on Mother Nature. What about building electrolysis water farms at these cities like Los Angeles and sell water to LAMWD,
Municipal Water District?
Los Angeles, thank you.
I'm going to guess
smart
there.
people here. So water farms off the coast powered by solar, wind, wave, and tidal power make sense as we dry up rivers by overuse. These farms could grow agriculture too. The Aztecs did it. It's the equivalent to landfills, a forever factory. And when hydrogen engines replace EVs, the outcome is pure water without microplastic beads. An actually sustainable source of pure water does not currently exist. There's the text.
Could somebody explain to those of us that don't know exactly what electrolysis is? Is this changing salt water to fresh water?
I'm not an expert on that.
I can give a
We turn to you,
onion.
Dakotah.
I would love for the next text message to be explaining how this is wrong. Essentially, what I understand about electrolysis is we'll talk about 3 elements, and those are electricity, hydrogen, and oxygen. And electrolysis, I believe, is electrocuting water into the process of breaking the covalent bonds into oxygen and hydrogen, its base components. And then I believe that hydrogen powered technology is also then that third element of electricity is also somehow coming out as it gets reconstituted. So there's some amount of energy inherent in water that you can break up into smaller pieces and energy comes out, and then you put energy back in and it comes back together. Or maybe it's the opposite of that, but it's around oxygen, hydrogen, and electricity and breaking them and putting them back together.
You didn't have to say you weren't familiar. You could have fooled any of us with that. Yeah. I got it now, though.
Those are at least concepts that are relevant.
Well, I think to your point, though, hydrogen, I've heard this argument quite a bit, that the electric phase of this transition is not the end goal because we have too much on the grid, right? So there's hydrogen power, there's nuclear power there, and again, it's this diversification of sources so that we're not putting all our eggs in one basket. I think we as humans should have learned that.
And y'all, how do y'all feel about the nuclear microgrids? This is an interesting one, I think.
It is interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of the research and real life examples that come from that. And it could be an option. I don't think any of us here are against any of these concepts or any of these projects. I don't think anybody here is against green energy. I think we all have a main goal of saving the planet for our future generations. I think sometimes when we get fast-tracked, though, we lose sight of that. And so just being mindful and reminding to slow down and really do due diligence to investigate these alternatives properly so we can really make the best decision possible moving forward for not only the planet, but for our next 7 generations.
And is nuclear a finite I think it's a finite source. Is that right? But it can be, I believe, because I've changed a little bit in my life. I was very anti-nuclear for a while, but I came from Sacramento. There was a Rancho Seco plant down there at one time. But it can be very clean energy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, extremely. I think if you compare it to virtually any other source of energy production that we have available, it is completely, categorically, exponentially cleaner in the perfect scenario, right? And I don't think anybody needs it to be explained that the problem with nuclear energy is that it can go wrong, because E equals mc squared was Einstein saying that there is a massive amount of energy in every single piece of mass. And you have fission and fusion. One is how the sun creates electricity, which is obviously pretty powerful. And the other one is how nuclear bombs and nuclear reactors work, which is essentially just, again, kind of similar to the hydrogen thing.
Splitting.
Breaking up, or reconstituting really, really tiny pieces of matter. So you can get, it's not unlimited, but you can get, for us on a practical level, nearly what seems like unlimited energy practically from nuclear power compared to the rest of the options that we have.
Wow.
But it's dangerous if it's not contained.
Yeah, there's the downside.
Yeah.
Has the problem of what to do with the waste been solved, or is that?
I think we should just shoot it up into space, but that is not my domain.
Well, at this point, there's enough trash up there.
Yeah,
that's where we're planning to move the human population is into space. And now they can't.
We just got to pick one direction and stick with it.
How about that place they just discovered that has life that's a couple of 100 light years away?
Well,
the half-life of that waste will be gone by then, right?
Whoa.
There's a
aliens?
potential for life. Is that right?
Well, evidently there's a gas or something being created that they're able to analyze that only happens that is formed by life.
Well, didn't the government last year say that UFOs are real?
Oh, what?
UFOs?
Oh, maybe they're doing it. Huh?
And Sasquatch together? I don't know.
Don't you go distance Sasquatch.
I know. It's race.
Well, I think that the point here being is there's not one silver bullet solution, right? There's a downside to almost every option that we have. But we can know with some certainty the impacts of certain industries, such as the coal industry. It's bad for the people mining it. It's terrible for the planet. The thing with, advertising anything these days is it doesn't have to be based in truth how you're marketing whatever your product is. Think about just natural foods. There's actually no basis for that designation other than to sell it as a natural food. It doesn't mean it's not grown with pesticides. It doesn't really mean anything anymore. So we have to be careful about when we're talking about our energy sources as well, because I was reading again about the lithium mines happening in northern Nevada and southeast Oregon. And the Oregon side really isn't happening yet. But to mine 1 ton of lithium, it releases 20 tons of carbon dioxide. So the trade-off is enormous. You are mitigating future emissions, but at what cost directly in the moment? Not to mention the sacred land that is being just pillaged in this process.
My take on that, you were talking about basically electric cars, is that we're in the very early days of electric cars, and they will continue to improve environmentally as we go down the road. And I'm saying that because I have an electric car that I might want to sell someplace.
Well, but that is the equivalent in 1 year of lithium mining to operating a coal mine for 22 years. I mean, that is a huge risk for reward. If our goal is to reduce emissions, that is a big wager.
But I haven't bought gas in 4 years, though, so.
And I'm not, I think we wouldn't diss anyone with an electric car because I think people are genuinely trying to make the right choice with their dollars. But that's where there needs to be some education on where these projects are happening, who is being impacted by these projects. Because I bet you if that car came with a sticker that said, powered by,
I could
pillaging
scrape
sacred land and, people dying over cobalt in the Congo.
I would put one of those bumper stickers we were talking about before.
Right on top.
But you might as well just put on the back of most newer cars, I'm trying my best,
Yeah.
And how sad, the whole green energy that we're talking about, and it is politics, like it or not, there's politics there. We're so disparate, if that's the right word, in camps right now that it's hard to make headway for going either direction. Now, apparently I did not complete the text again. Let me finish up that last text. So the last sentence that I read, a naturally sustainable source of pure water does not currently exist. It goes on. The bonds break with power in, yield the same amount of power yields and pure water, no plastic. Nuclear plants on rivers is like hydroelectric plants, inoperable on dried up rivers. The water cycle is broken. It is not the power, it's the water. I'll need help with understanding all of that. So anybody have anything to say on that?
I will just agree with this person in that clean water supply is probably our biggest environmental threat at this point. So yes, that is an issue with mining of all minerals. There is water involved in it. And you need a clean water source to process a lot of those things. So I just think, again, that's another alternative that should be raised when we're talking about large-scale wind farms on land, offshore, whatever it is. What are the actual impacts of installing and operating that energy source for a long period of time?
Do either of y'all want to say anything about like the Red Flat nickel mines or anything more local? Nope, just decking. I don't feel educated enough to speak on the mines, but there are
Well,
proposed mines in this area that there's ongoing work to.
the Red Flat nickel mines are proposed on the Rogue River Siskiyou. They are part of an administratively withdrawn area for mining, but that is set to expire. There are several groups that are interested in nickel mining in the serpentine soils, which would be mostly the headwaters of the Hunter Creek watershed and some of Pistol River. It's very concerning. I think from a botanical perspective, that's where a lot of endemic species live. There are lots of sacred areas in that area. And the amount of surface disturbance that you need to produce the nickel is, I don't know how it is economically worth it. But I will say that they are, undergoing the investigations. And, I brought up the slew of environmental legislation that exists that people have to jump through. But 1872 is the mining law that dictates that process. And it is obviously a little bit old.
Yeah, and we still operate on some very old laws and regulations, I believe.
Well, yeah. I mean, most recently, the Immigrant Alien Act
Thank you.
from 1792. I'm not saying that right at all, but obviously
another one.
outdated.
Obviously.
I used to live in Alaska, and at one point I lived not far from an area where there was a lot of gold mines, just small gold mines, individuals own them. And I used to tell people, when you get to a certain intersection, turn your watch back 250 years, because people would come out with 6 guns and all that. But gold fever is a real thing. You get that and you get a little nuts. But anyway, I had a point to this. I'll get back to it.
Well, profits are all the important things for some people, some organizations, some industries, let's say. We do have a text to the panel. Hope I read it all. The texture says, does the panel have an opinion on deep sea mining of rare earth metals, which has the potential to destroy habitats and potentially cause the extinction of species that depend on them?
Don't do it.
There you go.
Yeah. I think that is something that's being looked at. I don't know, any projects or anything that are happening at this time. I'm not 100% up on the latest on that, but I do think it's probably coming. It's probably in our very near future. And so, just back to the point of wanting to invest in the protection of our natural and cultural resources, but also learning to listen to Indigenous communities who have the that Indigenous science, that Indigenous knowledge that is often not listened to, not heard of, not recognized as being viable, because you can't, put your thumb on it. And I think that really needs to be highlighted as listen to your local communities, listen to your rural population and your tribal communities, because they know the land better than anybody else does.
Mm-hmm.
That intergenerational knowledge I see as basically the scientific method, but over thousands and thousands of years. And yeah, it's not documented in the same way, but those stories survive so many generations due to their validity. And a lot of those practices have shown their validity over time, such as, fire suppression, like we've talked so much about. And I think, to your point, it's not only about the deep sea mining, which I also agree, stick to what you know at this point. How could you possibly think of all of the ramifications or impacts of an action when you barely know the existing conditions of the deep sea? And it just seems like you're playing with fire, but in this case, you're probably playing with magma of the Earth's core, And I just don't, I think also I have a distrust of people's certainty in these situations because of things like the deep horizon, and just over time, as humans, our lack of ability to maintain anything to the standard in which we set it up in. And that's, I think, just, it's devastating. And it's more so ruining the view shed. I think particularly for wind, for a lot of Native communities, sacred sites are not only the place in the ground, but it's the mountaintop from which you see the world from. And you are putting something so artificial and something so potentially toxic in that space that it reduces the ceremonial value of it.
And to speak to the marine biology a little bit, or just the higher level ecosystems thinking around deep sea mining, I'll draw an equivalent to the forest and the landscape that we might be a little bit more familiar with walking around in. And if we think about an old growth forest from the perspective of carbon sequestration and how much of what we call like an ecosystem service, if we're just talking about the air we breathe, how much air, which all of us humans need to be breathing, does one old growth tree grow compared to a tree that's 10 years old? It is insane. It is exponentially more, thousands times more productive to have that equivalent of tree mass in old growth than it is to have new forests. And some studies have even indicated that because of all of the different processes and nutrients and gases that are being upturned in a forest that's been replanted, that a forest doesn't even actually offset the amount of carbon that it's sequestering. It doesn't even become a good thing from a carbon sequestration and an oxygen production perspective for the first 20 years, which means that any tree forest that's been logged and replanted in the last 20 years is still not producing any carbon sequestration services for us. And if we compare everything that's been replanted over the last 50 or 100 years, we're not even scratching the surface of what an old growth forest does. So I want to take that context and think about scraping and sweeping the entire floor of the entire ocean, or even just large tracts of it. But if we have a technological jump that allows us to go into a place on Earth that was previously inaccessible, and that place hasn't faced human impacts ever, we are going to face massive, massive repercussions from that in terms of ecosystem services.
You should go and look up the movie Rodan. You can probably get it on YouTube or something, and learn about the consequences of screwing around with Mother Nature. We don't know what's down there.
I want to watch that.
Yeah.
I also,
Okay.
one more note I do want to make, just to tack on to what y'all were saying before. Sometimes people ask me what I do, and if I'm feeling cheeky and I want to get into it, I say I work in environmental justice. And people sometimes think that's like a legal position, or if they're curious and ask questions, and I like to then further explain that I pretty much write plans for firefighters. I help with operational wildfire risk analysis. And people will say, well, how is that environmental justice? And what I like to say next is that for 30,000 years here, the wildfire management was super effective. And over the last 150 years, there's been some changes in management techniques, and we're having a really, really hard time with it. And I think that just speaks to the fact that, yeah, like intergenerational knowledge that has been here for tens of thousands of years is better in a lot of cases than the science we have, because using the science we have, even though I will say science is politicized, and what happens from things being observed to being enacted is an entire another conversation. Traditional ecological knowledge is generally undervalued in the West. And
What used to work can work again.
Yeah.
Basically. But isn't the difference, though, that what used to work was when there was, I don't know, a few thousand people here on the coast?
Well, in Vancouver Island in British Columbia, they had more people before colonization than they do now. And Vancouver Island now is having massive, massive septic and sewer infrastructure problems with a lower population than they did pre-colonization.
That's too bad to hear. That's a beautiful place.
Yeah, and we still haven't figured out how to flush our dookie in a way that is okay.
Yeah.
There is
We do know that soon we
less
won't have to flush 10 or 15 times because we're going to get the water pressure back. But we're not flushing
Dookie.
classified. We're not flushing classified documents. So
I mean, I think that the clean water, we could get into a whole whole nother, maybe that's our next show, Rick, is clean water. And
We
we'll talk
expect
about
you guys next week.
talk about
Yes.
water filtration and all of that. I did
That's
just want to put a quick plug in, I think, for Katrina's organization, Northwest American Indian Coalition, doing a huge lift here in Curry County for bringing traditional ecological knowledge and educating people on who has been here. And then if you are curious about the lithium mining, there's a group called People of Red Mountain, based with the Fort McDermott tribe, and they've been literally protesting in person these mining operations. So I'd encourage you to look them up, and all of the information that's out there about the lithium in your batteries.
And we are running out of time. This hour went quickly. But Dakotah wanted to, fire season. Here we go. How soon is that? I mean, it's already here, I
May.
guess, but you must be ramping up stuff.
I'm going to kick it over to Tabatha, actually.
Oh,
I mean, I can say at a higher level, the regional forecast for this area is not severe right now. And I think that's because we've been having a pretty wet winter transitioning into spring
okay.
right now.
But that can go away in a twinkle. Mm-hmm. It's amazing how quickly the ground at my house dries up. Day or two of sun.
Yeah, I will say that we've had sunny weather for the last week. There are definitely concerns about burning conditions in certain places right now. Higher elevation, maybe less so.
I'm watering my landscape already. So
Yeah, and more importantly, I think we're going to have major resource shortages this summer in terms of people because of the reductions in force and the DOGE cuts. Federal agencies, NOAA has less meteorologists. I mean, it is so important to have a meteorologist on an incident who can help you predict fire behavior. And that's just something that is a little known. It's not all firefighters. It's not all dozers. There's a lot of other ancillary positions that support making sound decisions during fires. And it is concerning, I think, a lot of people that we're going to have a longer, drier, hotter year on record than potentially last year and less resources to deal with it.
Yeah.
we're really running out of time. Do any of you have an organization or a website or something that people can get a hold of you or other relevant people?
Anybody wants to check out nwaic.org. That's the website for Northwest American Indian Coalition, and we're very honored to be here today.
And if you're interested in forestry issues, the Wild Rivers Coast Forest Collaborative, that's a mouthful, but Katrina built us a beautiful website, wrcfc.org. And you can sign up. We have once a month meetings. We talk about fuels reduction, and we will be getting some good fire, some medicine back on the land over the next 3 years. So we got about $500,000 to focus on a couple of communities, fuels reduction and getting prescribed burning and cultural fuel burning on the land. Very happy about that.
All of the coolest projects I get to work on are for these two women, so I would definitely go check out those websites first. But if anybody is interested in cartography services, custom-made maps, or spatial data analysis, you can go to www.tetontopo.com. That's TETONTOPO.com.
You know, we were initially talking about this cartography stuff. I was kind of surprised at specifically what you do.
Yeah. Do you want to say anything more about that?
Yeah. What, did you go in before a burn or before?
Yeah, my background is in suppression. So you imagine on a wildfire operation, you have people getting evacuated, thousands of people navigating in trucks and helicopters, hand crews. Everybody needs to figure out where to go every morning or sometimes every hour, and things are moving fast with a wildfire. So I used to travel around at fire camps and make dozens of maps every day, all summer long. And then I was lucky enough to get assigned to the Smith River fire, spend some time in Crescent City, and then some time in Gasky. And then that led to me spending some time in Brookings. And that's how I met Katrina. And the rest is history.
I think maybe we should ask the listeners if they want to hear about wildfire or water next.
Yeah.
Because I think we could
send a
dive
poll.
into all the roles of wildfire. And
We'll put them on the schedule, both, at two separate times if we have to. You guys have been great. This is just wonderful. Thank you all for being here, and we will have you back again soon, and very soon. So Ray,
And we'll flip a coin, water or...
okay.
And you can be here with me Tuesdays at 3.
For
Make
the
sure you take-
daily, weekly.
Check out Dakotah's show. I think you're going to say, oh, wow, that's good.
All right, man. Thanks, everybody. You've been listening to KCIW LP 100.7, beautiful Brookings, Oregon. And we'll be back again next week, next Sunday.
Stay safe and smoke a joint.
There you go. 420.